Hi, and welcome to PodRocket, a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. Hey everyone, I am your host today, Paige Niedringhaus, and we are joined by Alexander Lichter, the DevRel at VoidZero, here to talk about Void. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure to be on a podcast.
Absolutely. And Void has been making a lot of news lately. So it's exciting times. We're glad to have you here to talk about it. For people who are not as familiar, could you tell us just a little bit about what is Void?
Yes, it's actually interesting because Void hasn't been released so far. Also, when the podcast airs, there might be a beta already, but no like public global available release. So Void itself, let's think about that. We at VoidZero, we think a lot about developer productivity, right? So you've released Vite Plus, this unified toolchain to do all of it local. At some point, the realization came, look, the local part and the local experience is only one part of the equation. So what's the other part? And the answer there is the platform. So we decided to build a deployment platform that works together with your code base. So instead of wrestling with infrastructure, your code is your infrastructure, and we make sure that everything you need from databases to KV storage, object storage, etc., is deployed based on your needs and your code. So you don't have to wrestle with that. Plus, you can just use the Void SDK to interact with the platform. So if you say, okay, I need some database, you use the database function from the Void SDK, and we'll make sure everything works right out of the box. The other part is, of course, developer experience and also a bit of AI nativeness in the current times, especially. So the idea is that everything is very intuitive, works out of the box with your favorite frameworks and meta frameworks. You can use it with, Tanstack, Nux. The only thing is it is Vite specific. So if you don't have a Vite application, that might be a bit difficult. But even then, you can deploy plain SPAs if you want to, static sites, or even like whole backends if you use, the Void SDK for that and API routes that are based on Hono to deploy all of that. So I would say Void, to wrap it up in one sentence, is a deployment platform that integrates well with your code and gives you, through that, a wonderful developer experience.
So really the only meta framework that you're talking about when you say it doesn't integrate well with Vite is Next.js.
Unless you use VNext, but yes, that's correct. That's a very simple architectural limitation there. And hopefully the other, you can use React and Vite, and then, for example, some page-based routing features with Void if you need their API routes, and you get a great developer experience. So that's always an option.
Yeah. And I mean, everybody who develops except for Next.js has great Vite integration. I think it's the most popular, whenever there are surveys. So I don't see it being a problem that Vite is the main driver of this.
Yeah, and also it allows us to do a lot more things, right? We don't have to make assumptions over how your tech stack might look like. And the fact that Void itself, the SDK and everything, it's integrated also partially as a Vite plugin, also shows how flexible Vite is. And the best part that we didn't have to change Vite or anything. It stayed as it is. We could just develop with the current plugin infrastructure and ecosystem. So that also shows how powerful Vite is in the end. And that's important to mention. Vite will stay platform agnostic. Nothing will change on there.
Beautiful. So you mentioned that there is an SDK, and the Void deploy command it seems like the thing that does everything. It builds your app, it runs migrations, it provisions resources and deploys it. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening under the hood when it's doing all of this for you?
Yeah, a couple of things actually. And that also might be subject to change given on the feedback we get. But in the end, it depends what your app needs. If it's just, okay, I have a static SPA, it will build it and will send it up to our platform, right? The Void platform is built on top of Cloudflare. So in the end, you get a Cloudflare worker out of that. But if you say, okay, I have a database schema, I need some migrations to be executed, then that will also be covered. Assets will be uploaded. We have cron job support, queue support, etc. All that will be scaffolded and sent up there. So really, everything is covered what is in your need. And if you say, okay, look, I don't want to use a database like a D1 database hosted, you can use Postgres through Hyperdrive, or you can use also something totally external that's up to you. Then that's not managed through Void, but everything that we can do for you, we're happy to do.
I think that's always what, especially front-end developers, but developers in general are looking for. I don't want to think about my Terraform files. I don't want to think about what configs or adapters I have. I just want to push it up and have it go live and work.
Yes, that's the goal in the end, right? And for example, Vite Plus itself, just imagine you start a project with VP Create. You can scaffold it. You have all the local toolchain there with your formatter, your linter, Vite as dev server, build tool with Rolldown as bundler. And then you just need Void deploy and you're good to go. And at the current stage, we don't even have a dashboard because things are so simple. And we want to make sure that it stays that way, simple and manageable, so that everything is, it just works.
Nice. So one of Void's big ideas, which you mentioned earlier, is your code is your infra. So the platform scans your source code. It automatically provisions what you need. How does that work? And are there any limits to that approach that you should call out to developers who are considering it?
Yes. So as mentioned, if you use the Void SDK, then it's pretty simple to infer what parts are of your need, right? So let's say use the database function call, then we can take a look at that. Or if you have a drizzle schema, migrations folder setup, etc. You can always opt out. So there's always a way to say, hey, I don't want a database. I don't want the auth you provide. I don't want, some API routes. I want to roll my own. And given that you can use it with meta frameworks, that is a perfect pairing. So we don't force you to say, okay, you have to rewrite your application to use everything we provide. If you say, hey, I want to just deploy it in the Void platform, my other resources somewhere else, it's fine. Or, okay, I want to step-by-step integrate then a database, then maybe KV store, or stay with something somewhere else. That's perfectly fine and it works. Limitations, I would say that depends on what you use. If you, like before, come from, let's say, a Vite application with React Views, so not a meta framework per se, then things should work as before. Everything that has just been a Vite plugin, that's all right. If you use, for example, Analog, Nuxt, or SvelteKit, so they're based on Nitro, you might have some limitations because Nitro is bundling things a bit differently, but that's all also outlined on the docs, and you and your agent will also know about that. But ideally, there are also in the future ways around that. So, of course, we also want to work closer together with the framework maintainers to make sure everybody gets the best experience.
Nice. So Void is built on Cloudflare's global network, which is great. It seems like a lot of people or a lot of frameworks lately are going towards Cloudflare, Redwood SDK, M-, Astro, the Astro team. So what does it mean for developers in terms of what they can and can't do because it's built on Cloudflare?
Yeah. So, of course, the typical worker limitations, they apply, right? Like long living connections or services running like on your, private VPS, that might be a bit difficult. Sure, we have durable objects. There are a couple ways around that, but still these limitations apply. I think one big benefit, though, compared to the scenarios that you've mentioned, is that you don't have to wrestle with yet another account. So you don't need your own Cloudflare account. You don't need to go through all the, as we said before, provisioning processes, managing resources. But this is basically taken from you and done automatically. Other than that, limitations are very similar to that. And as mentioned, you might get a certain vendor lock-in as you already work with Cloudflare workers. You have some things and some features that you might use. But I think this is similar with a lot of integrated platforms. And you're free to say, hey, I don't want, that's okay. Or I don't want to host on Cloudflare. Then Void is not for you. And then to be very open with that. Other than that, I think given that we handle a lot of these things and provision stuff for you, we basically contribute to that developer experience. So some people might think, okay, there's some vendor lock-in. And yeah, sure, if you use all the platform features and you want to migrate off that from one day to another, that might be a bit more difficult. But that's the same if you use different vendors, then you have to migrate from different vendors to different places.
Yeah, I know people talk so much about this, but it seems like whenever you choose any sort of third-party SaaS tool or auth or whatever, you're committing yourself a little bit to vendor lock-in no matter what. There's going to be some pain going from one to another no matter what you choose. So if it's a one-stop shop, which is what it sounds like Void is trying to be, that doesn't sound so bad to me.
No, actually, that's the case, right? So we try to get everything under one hat and give this cohesive experience so we don't have to wrestle with different services and try to plumb everything together. And there are also some choices, let's say, for example, auth, where if you don't want to use our scaffolded auth, it's fine. It's not a problem. That will not make your experience with Void worse.
Awesome. So you talked a little bit about Void versus Vite Plus, but how does Void fit into the bigger picture of VoidZero alongside Vite Plus for anybody who was thinking about it but wasn't quite sure how they work together or stand alone?
Yes. So this ties a bit into what I said before. In a way, Void and Vite Plus are separate, right? Sure, you can use Vite Plus with everything in the ecosystem, so you can do ideally with Void as long as it's Vite specific. But I think if you want to have the best developer experience out there, and once you can also try out Void, given that I worked with that for quite a while, I can say that. But once you get your hands on that, then I definitely suggest to try that. It's just to have the local part, everything in your developing tool chain and your CI covered by Vite Plus, from Git hooks, from your formatting, your linting, your testing, and so on, by the underlying tools. But then you don't need you don't need tons of dependencies. You have Vite Plus itself and everything will be managed. And that's your local part. And then for the deployment part, you have Void. I think this is like the nicest developer experience stack with the, I would say, fastest and like next generation tools than you can get at the moment. And once you can try it out for sure too. For Vite Plus itself, MIT license, it's free. Some people might have remembered that our original plan was a bit different, but I'm very happy that eventually we decided to not go the way to try to monetize Vite Plus and instead make sure this is free forever for everyone under MIT. So that's also how at the end Void should be our main business model. And that's a good news for everyone.
That's absolutely good news. Do you offer some sort of a free tier or a trial for people who are interested in Void but aren't quite sure if that's the right move for them?
Yes, absolutely. So we will offer a generous free tier. I can't give any details at the current time being, but that's definitely a plan. And we also want to make sure that the open source world can benefit from it as much as possible. But yeah, details sooner when we come to public beta or G.
Great. So Vite 8 just shipped, and it shipped with Rolldown, which is a big change and a big improvement from the previous ES build and roll up model that you had before. Real world numbers are showing just massive speed improvements for big companies, 46 seconds to 6 seconds. Other things, it's just amazing. Are those numbers that you're sharing, are they representative of what Rolldown can do, or are they more like outliers in the community?
So I think like a 10x improvement is definitely like something that's achievable. In the end, it all depends on your setup. So one of the things that's a bit tricky is always when it comes to React applications and the React compiler, because the React compiler uses Babel, and that means just way slower builds than if you don't use the React compiler. That's the unfortunate downside, that you have to parse the AST again, and then even Rolldown as bundler can't do much because we have to wait for the process. Same with a lot of things. If you use some custom plugins or some, let's say, same for linting in the end. Like if you use slow lint rules, it's not necessarily the linter. That's the problem there. Yeah, we've seen with Rolldown people migrating over to Vite 8, build time improvements that are stellar. And I'm so happy for all the people who can experience that. I'm even more grateful for the people who tried it out in the beta. Last time we talked about Rolldown on the podcast, we also had the case like, okay, there is a beta available. People can try it out. There was Rolldown Vite. And it's so nice that everybody can get into these beautiful numbers now.
So for a developer who is considering switching over, are there certain stacks or certain application styles that you think would benefit most from Rolldown and the speed?
I think it's not necessarily about application styles. Everything that's Vite-based should get a decent bump. Mm-hmm. It really comes down to what dependencies use, which plugins. So there are a couple of things. We have a migration guide, which make things easier to migrate because, I mean, with Rolldown, this was the biggest architectural changes that came to Vite since V2. So since it actually became like open for everyone, got re-architected. And with that, of course, we try to make it as smooth as possible. A lot of people, they can switch and there are no problems. We still have a migration guide because there are some changes that people have to be aware of. And other than that, there's also a plugin registry now. So you might use a plugin that is not necessary because Rolldown can now do it under the hood. And then you can get rid of that, which also means you save a lot of time during build.
Absolutely. That's always great when you can remove dev dependencies.
Indeed. Especially with the latest supply chain attacks, we rather have less than more, right?
Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about Void versus Vercel versus some of the other platforms that you could lock in. It seems like you're positioning yourselves as an alternative to Vercel with Vite as the main powerhouse behind it. Are there any places where you think the comparison holds up better versus where maybe it doesn't compare as much or it breaks down a little bit?
I think we'll see a lot of that when people actually can get a hand on. And I think I would rather like the people to tell me what they think about a platform than like me sharing my thoughts on that, because obviously I'm biased. So far, like right now we have a couple alpha testers. Of course, all the core members of the big open source projects of the Vite stack, so to say, they can already give it a try. And it's nice to say so many people feel that things feel very cohesive, very well fit together. And that's the idea there. I think besides that, there's one thing that we just want to make sure that we're clear about. And I mentioned it, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it. Like first, just because there's Void, it doesn't mean that Vite will go into a Void only direction. For us, it's very important that these are two separate things. And the other thing is that we're very clear about our constraints and very upfront with what we're doing. And in the end, how this should benefit both VoidZero as a business, but also, and most and foremost, open source.
It almost seems like you've taken an approach similar to VS, where everybody can download the IDE. They can use all the plugins, and the marketplace is free for everybody. But if you want like GitHub Copilot or something, you do have to start paying a little extra. Everything else is just available to the whole community, no matter what, forevermore.
Yes, I think it's quite an interesting comparison. And I think it holds up to some degree because obviously somehow the bills have to be paid. First, for the people of VoidZero working all the open source projects full time, but of course also they're the open collectors for Vite, Vitest, OXC, etc., and all the countless contributors and core team members that are also not employed. And we really hope that Void will help sustaining open source and make things better for Vitest, etc., no matter if you use the deployment platform or not. And that would be a great outcome for the whole ecosystem.
Do you think anybody on the Vite team will work on vNext and help to make that a more stable meta framework?
That's interesting. Potentially, hard to say for me. I think the whole thing is interesting to see that in the end, we can also get Next-like capabilities and even the same API with Vite. What I'm more interested is, though, that people from different platforms or platform providers, so like Vercel, Cloudflare, Netlify, etc., they get more involved with Vite and maybe even join the core team. I know we have a couple of people from these companies being really well integrated into like ecosystem calls and shaping the future, because there's one thing that's still not fully stable, and that's the ecosystem API. And I think when that launches like full on and not in experimental anymore and is like finished in that sense, as much as software can be finished, I think that will be a big step for Vite. Same for like people using different meta frameworks on top of Vite, like getting together, figuring out how Vite can help them building better frameworks or ease some pains. Yeah, that would be beneficial, I think.
Yeah, if nothing else, I think vNext kind of lit a fire under the team at Next.js to make the adapters better so that it can be more transferable, even though it's still not exactly easy to take it anywhere else for hosting.
That's true. Though I have to say the Next adapters, they were apparently in the making for a while already. But still, it fires up the social media hype around it for sure.
That's as good as anything that you can hope for. Oh, so the Void platform has MCP support, and that is for AI coding agents to help them be able to scaffold and deploy the apps autonomously. How far does that actually go today? Can you really just say to your agent, your cursor, your Copilot, your Claude, just do it for me?
So I can tell a fun story about that, actually. When I started like using Void for the very first time, docs were rough because they were not available anymore after the release. So people can't like snoop around and everything, which makes sense. And there was the CLI is there, which is still around, but there was little to no help. And I was like, okay, I get going, get my hands dirty, try it out. Manually, didn't work. And then I was like, you know what? I'll just use, in this case, Claude Code. I was like, there you go. Here's the thing deployed on Void. And it just took a couple of minutes and it worked. So in that sense, I think there is a good example where, of course, we had back then still a lot of work to do to make things better for humans, which is still an important focus of ours. But there it already showed that our AI integration worked pretty well if AI could do it better than me in the first try. So while there are still commands that, you need human interaction, especially decision-making, etc., yeah, deploying itself works through agents. It works out to figure out problems, to see what is going wrong, if there is anything going wrong, what you might need to do. So there's enough info available already. And I think I haven't had this cohesive experience ever so far. And once I tried it out and it just worked, I was like, okay, this makes sense. I already see where this is going.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because even though I use something like Netlify to host my own site that's a static site, it still takes a couple tries to get it right because it's Astro. So you go through, you watch it fail, you take the logs from the build, you post them into Claude. Claude figures out what's wrong, but it still is not just seamless end-to-end, one try and you're done.
Yeah, so that's really something also for debugging issues or figuring out things that helped a lot. So working with AI, trying to deploy, let's say, a playground with a new feature and seeing, okay, that fails. I have all the context around because the SDK is available and as it will be open source. Then that will also help say, okay, what functions are available? What can your application do with the Void SDK? Which then also shapes your decisions in terms of how should I build that feature so it works well on the platform? And you have all these options. Now, your agent can also help you choosing a good one from an architectural point of view of what's available.
Awesome. So you said Void is still in early access, not available for everybody yet. But what should developers be thinking about before betting on it for production? Is there anything that they should consider before choosing it?
Of course, once it's available and in public beta, I would still, right now we're cautioned with like mission critical load. As soon as there's GA, that's a different story, obviously. But what is the deployment platform? Is only deploy demos? Of course not. That's the only advice for people using it right now. I think once you think of the fact, okay, this is hosted on Cloudflare, this is the decision, you cannot easily move it to a different hoster in terms of, oh, can I have my KV store somewhere else? Yeah, but then it's your responsibility. So we talked about vendor lock-in before. It's more like, do I put everything on the Void platform based on Cloudflare? If you don't want to, for whatever reasons, can be like legal, can be limitations that you have that just don't work with Cloudflare workers for whatever reasons, then that might be not for you, and that's fine. But to be fair, I think there are not that many applications where this could apply, or where this, let's say, small edge cases couldn't be resolved then with a service somewhere else, or maybe with some help from the Void platforms. We're also always open for feedback there and see what people need. But yeah, other than that, I think just being aware of the limitations and not expecting that things behave like a typical, VPS, Docker container, Kubernetes cluster is similar.
Cool. What do you think it would take for Void to become the default deployment target for Vite? The same way that kind of Vercel became the default for Next.js?
I'm not sure. I think it's a bit difficult because in the end, Next and Vercel, Next was there, then Vercel was quickly developed as, okay, hosting is difficult for these things, so let's make it better. While of course we want to make sure we do give a great developer experience, we still are like, we know Vite very well. We know the ecosystem very well. We ideally can catch up with features that other platforms might offer, or basically have a compelling pricing and feature range there. But one thing that I don't see happen is that we like basically forced it upon the users that, hey, you should use Void here. There will always be a choice, and that fits very well into the whole open source ecosystem thoughts of being platform agnostic. But in the end, the platform itself should convince people, say, hey, this is phenomenal. Like, great, I can get from starting from a VP create to deploy in like less than 5 minutes and get everything I need for my application. So prototyping works fast, MVPs work fast, just like getting things ready and validating works, plus actual like live production ready. Don't want to say enterprise ready as the big buzzword, but even that platform applications work on a platform. I think the goal is to show that we can do that consistently, and it works, and it gives the best developer experience out there, right? That's the goal.
Alex, it's been great talking to you. Is there anything that you want people to know about Void that we haven't discussed yet?
Only make sure you sign up for the early access once it's getting out, because we're always happy for feedback. As we said before, smaller batches to get started, so we can iron out the rough edges, and it's as polished as it can get for you to try it out. And yeah, other than that, try out all the tools, right? From Vite Plus that is free that we discussed. If you don't use Vite yet, I don't know why not. So yeah, let us know.
Where should people go if they want to learn more about Void, talk to you about Vite Plus, or just generally get involved with the whole?
Yeah, for Void, Void.cloud is the way to go. There's also a link to the Discord server on there where we're quite active. So people chatting about Vite Plus and Void. Other than all the other ecosystem projects, Vite has to have own Discord servers as well. So you can join them if you say, oh, I have a Vite specific question, or I want to chat with people there. That's always a good option. And otherwise, I'm on all the social media you can think of: Blue Sky, Twitter, LinkedIn if necessary, YouTube as well. We have a YouTube channel where we also show some like deep dives, some short information as well. So there are a couple ways to follow depending on what you prefer out there.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us on LogRocket today. It's been great having you on the podcast again.
Thanks for having me.